I was always a very keen observer right from my childhood. A marketeer needs to think from a much wider lens than just communication and advertising. At the end of the day, I believe that a marketeer anchors the entire P&L of the organization. Data and data orientation brings in a lot of, I would say, ammunition to the marketing team to convince the larger ecosystem on what needs to be done beyond just running a TV ad or a digital campaign.
Hey there, welcome to Marketing Mavericks with IndieFolio. Today we have Kunal Sharma with us, who's the Associate Vice President of Marketing and MT E-Commerce at KRBL Limited. Kunal's enjoyed a fantastic experience of over 15 years where he's worked with some top consumer brands in the country, be it ITC, Dabur, and now recently KRBL. We get into the specifics of QCommerce, selling consumer product goods to a pan-India audience, and talk a lot about his journey. Hey Kunal, thanks for your time and welcome to the podcast.
Hi. Thanks, Kavan. Thanks for having me.
Really appreciate you taking out the time on a Monday morning for me. I, wanted to just hop onto the conversation with my first question, which is around how did you stumble upon marketing as a career choice? If you could unpack that for us.
Sure. In fact, Kavan, I honestly come from a family of educationists, and growing up in Calcutta, which is anyways a city of educationists, right? So obviously it was, I didn't have an ecosystem which was more on the business side of things or on, having exposure to marketing. In fact, a very interesting story I'll tell you. I mean, this was 2006 when I was just enrolling into my MBA, and I'd gone to watch this movie called Corporate with my parents. And, frankly, what all of us saw, my parents being educationists, they felt, oh my God, what's my son getting into, right? But, I held strong, right? And I did what I, kind of wanted to. Having said that, I think I was always a very keen observer, right, from my childhood. And that probably, while I didn't realize that in my early stages of my life when I was in school, but as I went into engineering and then subsequently into MBA, I just felt that I had the knack for, something that would get me to observe very keenly and human behavior in that way. And that's where I realized that maybe marketing is what I would want to do, right? And that's what led me into this whole journey for the last 15-20 years.
Great. I think, would you then say that observational skills and the ability for you to kind of understand human beings is like fundamental to being a good marketer?
Yeah. I think, and that's a piece of advice I would want to give anyone who's contemplating getting into marketing or in the realm. You need to be a very, very keen observer, because every moment of human behavior that you're coming across, and it need not be something related to your field, but when you're, I'll tell you a very interesting thing. Even in the canteen when people are picking up food, if you stand there and observe people, you will learn a lot about, or you'll get a lot of indications about how people are. What's this kind of person about? So if those kind of things are things that, interest you, and you love observing people, their behavior, then marketing is your cup of coffee.
Fantastic. I have a last follow-up here. I'm at an age where a lot of my friends are, they've probably done engineering or they've done, accounting, and they're not entirely sure if they want to double down on that. And a lot of them say, hey, I'm not really sure what I like anymore. And I always ask them to try and go within and really see, what naturally comes to them. So any instances maybe in school or college which prompted you to think, okay, you know what, I love those aspects, what you just mentioned before?
No, so I'll tell you, like I said about the observation piece. So as you grow, you keep doing a lot of things, right? So in my childhood days, I used to go a lot of, grocery shopping with my dad, right? And, I used to observe people, and I used to pick up things, and I used to enjoy the learnings that I used to get there, right? So that made me, understand that this is something I would love to do. And at a later stage in life, when I kind of triangulated and saw this kind of behavior, that's when I realized that, this is probably something that I would love to do. The other thing which I would encourage people to do is to read a lot.
Hmm.
Or in today's world, I would say there are a lot of other mediums. It's not just reading. Hearing a lot of people talk about their experiences, watch movies, you get wider exposure. And that, kind of, sometimes you stumble upon stuff which you otherwise would not have, and that opens up, doors for you in your mind as to what you want to do. So at
Yeah.
a stage when you are in school or college, or maybe pursuing your studies, your higher studies, I think you need to do a wider spectrum of things so that you finally land up doing what you're really passionate about.
That's really good advice. That throw a wide net,
Yeah,
you'll eventually be able to understand what you like to do.
true, true.
And I think momentum brings like information to you. Instead of you just not doing much, it's just better for you to get your hands dirty in as many things as possible. I've had the pleasure of speaking to a lot of marketing leadership through this podcast,
Yeah,
and I have seen a lot of engineers jump into marketing just randomly. I've seen a lot of folks who've done the entire drill of going to the top colleges for MBA, starting with sales and kind of building their career up as well. So there's been both kinds of folks, formally trained marketeers and informally trained or experientially trained marketeers, as you say.
right.
um, Many folks today are pondering, hey, maybe I just, like I said, finished my engineering and I want to maybe switch my career to marketing. Or a lot of people maybe are younger than that and they are figuring out what to do. Is formal education in marketing as important? Do you think what you learn today in college is cutting edge and it'll get you up to speed for the market?
No, I think that's a very pertinent question, Kavan. I think if you ask me, right, my journey, and most people of people who would have started at a similar time as me, I think that was a time when India and most Indian parents felt that a secure, you know, professional journey would start with doing either medicine or engineering, right? And in some ways, that's what we gave back to our parents by saying yes. We kind of bring that, but then we eventually managed to do what we wanted to do. But having said that, if I look back at the kind of education I've had, what it definitely does not do is not that what you learn there in the classroom is what really translates into action as you go along and as you grow, right? So maybe 20% of what I learned formed in some way or the other is what I'm using today.
Hmm.
The rest of the 80% is fundamentally the experience you gather in a
Hmm.
in a in a good education system, right? Let me talk about some of my personal examples. In my engineering days, I did mechanical engineering. I got the opportunity to set up an automotive club in my engineering college days, and then I got into organize a college fest, right?
Hmm.
In during MBA, one of the biggest learning experiences I had, because I was out of class because of this reason for a large number of sessions, was I was part of the placement committee, right?
Hmm.
The kind of skills that I learned on negotiation, talking to people, taking people along, I think that goes a long way. And I think it's fundamentally how the education system is constructed. Everything that happens around you, which you at that point of time feel is not really the core of what you are doing, is actually building you for the future. And sometimes during that time you feel, oh, I'm missing classes, maybe I'm doing something which is not relevant to what I want to do. But it fundamentally adds up to you as a person and makes you grow as a stronger professional for the future.
Absolutely. I second that. In school we started our college festival in our school festival, and in college I was part of Rotaract Club, and
Yeah.
I believe those were my formative years to start thinking of starting my own company in my 12th. And I think these aspects really really push you. So I'm glad you say that. So I think to conclude, I would say there's no a real arbitrary answer, yes and no.
Yeah.
I believe everything works well. As far as, I think, coming back to your first point, be curious and get your hands dirty. eventually you'll figure out what you're good at, and as long as you like what you do and you're good at what you do, I think things will unfold in your
Yes,
favor.
yes, yes.
um, I also wanted to now check with you, on entering the industry. A lot of marketers I've interviewed in this podcast give a recommendation that start with sales. Why do you think that's the case? Even you've done the same.
No, I think, Kavan, if you look at most people who've done an MBA and gotten into sales and marketing, typically you would see people spending a couple of years in sales, starting with sales, and then moving into, the other aspects, the other functions, and then, getting into marketing. I've been in that ecosystem for a while, and I strongly feel that someone who's done a good stint in sales will become a very, very good brand manager. Essentially because you learn and pick up a lot in terms of the practicality or reality of getting your product to the market when you're working in sales. It makes you much more street smart. In fact, it takes you out of your world of theory and takes you into the world of practicality. And I think that's what is very critical, right? So when I started my career and I got the opportunity to work in great organizations like ITC, Dabur, and now KRBL, I think one focus and one clarity that I had was to do each of my stints in a manner that it adds up to my next stint,
Hmm.
right? And I think that fundamentally is something that all professionals should build on, right? Because that will help them grow into better professionals as they grow in their career.
Absolutely. I think the feedback loop is unbeatable, when you're doing sales, because you are immediately going out there and talking to customers, and you get that 1:1
Yeah,
qualitative analysis, which I think is unbeatable. I wanted to ask you though, you've done ITC, you've done Dabur, and you've joined a large organization like KRBL at the leadership level.
yeah.
So while the fundamentals stay the same, how at a senior level do you also try and do things like sales and talking to customers, because of the other priorities, which may be taking up your time? So any insights on how you probably try to understand the KRBL market,
Yeah, sure.
joining from a top down approach? Yeah.
No, I think fundamentally, I just believe that the fundamentals don't change in any industry, right? If you look at a very hardcore FMCG company to a company which operates in maybe different segments of the FMCG space,
Mm.
yeah. So ITC, large behemoth businesses across a lot of I would say categories. Dabur again very focused on a certain set of categories like healthcare and then personal care and foods, right? Large set of so again a large set of brands, small brands, big brands, so on and so forth, right? Coming to an organization like KRBL, fundamentally very different. Single brand, when I say consumer brand, single consumer brand, large play and a huge top line in a single category. So I
Correct.
think fundamentals don't change across organizations, right? At the end of the day, I believe that a consumer and a customer is the core of any business, right? As you keep, if the organization has its focus on the consumer and the customer, then they have better chances of succeeding. And that's a fundamental which I've seen across all three organizations that I have worked for, right? Which make them leaders in whichever categories they operate in. So I think, and the second thing, and the second thing, and I was reading, a recent book by some veterans in the industry, and
Mhm.
they talk about how managers at a point of time, IQ was important, right? To a point where leaders started saying EQ, emotional quotient, is important, right? And today they introduced a concept called adaptability quotient, which is how adaptable you are as you move in your professional journey. So if you have that adaptability quotient, it's expected that you're going to succeed in whatever you do. So those are my 2 cents on the question you had.
Fantastic. No, I think that covers things pretty well. Now, I'd like to go a little bit deeper into what you've been up to for the last few years at KRBL. To start off with, I'd love for you to kind of um, unpack the market for us.
Sure.
I know that This company's been around, more than India technically
Yeah.
before our independence, and one of the largest producers out there, world's largest producers, in fact. And India also, I believe, is only next to China, if I'm not wrong, in consumption.
Right.
Um, so how's the market like, right? Are there any top consumers, top states which contribute to the entire mix?
So let me try and give you a perspective of the business. See, rice obviously, and being a staple, I mean, it is given India's size, is expected to be, a huge play, right? Now, when you look at India and the demographic construct of India, um, obviously a branded player like us will be playing somewhere in the top of the pyramid, right? When I say top of the pyramid, it's a huge pyramid, so top of the pyramid itself is also sizable, right? Uh, Now in India, see, there are various varieties of rice that get consumed, right? There are a lot of regional varieties of rice, especially in south, east. So if I were to break the country today, south and east are the primary rice eating population and rice eating consumers. Whereas if you look at north and west of the country, then it's a blend of both rice and wheat on the plate, right? So you come to Delhi, you will find that people generally have a mix of chapati and rice in their meals, right? So that's how rice is fundamentally segmented. Now, our organization KRBL works, and large part of the revenues, 95% of the revenues come from the Basmati segment. Basmati, which is a GI crop which grows in the northern belts of India, in the Gangetic, up to the Indo-Gangetic plains. So, so I think our large part of focus is on the Basmati space, right? And Basmati is obviously within the rice segment also a premium part of the industry. Okay.
Hmm.
Uh, Now, if you look at our business, right, we operate in the packaged part of that basmati rice industry in India. Yes, the industry is broken up into two parts. One is what we technically call the consumer pack business, which is what consumers buy from the shelf, take it home and consume it at home. And then there is a bulk pack business, as we call it, which is largely the horeca or the hotels, restaurants, cafeteria consumption kind of a channel, right? Which we operate in. So these are the two segments that we operate in. But happy to talk a little bit more about our strategy on this as we go along in this conversation. But this is just to give you a construct of the market that we operate in, and also to tell you that when you look at basmati, then it's a reverse of what you heard about in terms of rice. So although south and east are rice eating core populations, north and west is where basmati is more predominant. One, because of
Interesting.
where the crop comes from and the eating habits in it, and also the fact that in south and east, because it is at the center of the plate, a lot of regional rices get consumed in those belts. So this is just to give you a landscape of the rice industry in India.
Fantastic. But if I'm not wrong, South would still overall be the maximum contributor to your P&L, though, right?
Yes to ours, essentially because of our play in the long grain rice, where we hold very high market shares in that market, both in our consumer pack as well as in our bulk pack market. So that's the reason why you would see that skew in our business. But if I were to give you a flavor of the overall basmati category, which includes the so-called loose basmati consumption, then north and west become important markets for us.
Understood. Understood. So I believe if you're building something like this in India, I believe a big competition for you would be this consumer buying behavior of having loose rice,
Yeah.
at the end of the day.
Yeah.
So what's been your overall strategy to basically overcome that? Today, again, being very candid with you, even the newer generation is like packaged and you know industrialized production is more and more kind of being like,
Yeah.
hey, I don't want that. I want somebody authentic.
Yeah.
um but of course, we all know that it's a very idealistic statement to make.
True.
So how do you end up dealing with both these looming consumer perceptions which are there?
Right. Right. A very, very. It's one of my favorite questions to respond to. But I think in terms of our strategy, I think if you look at the consumption of basmati in various parts of the country. One, very clearly, two-thirds of basmati consumption which goes into households is still loose. So that's to us very clearly our source of business growth, right?
Right.
I think, and I'm not saying that's an easy one to do crack, but that's essentially where our future consumer set lies.
Mm.
The second piece that I want to talk about is there is an organic trend, right, that we are seeing in most packaged food categories. You talk about spices, you talk about atta. There is a gradual gravitation towards more hygienic packaged food, right?
Mm.
Uh, as a leader in the category, we feel our role is to accelerate this whole consumer behavior, right?
Mm.
And it's not an easy one. Uh, there are a few pillars that we've identified for ourselves which will help us do this, and we see this as a 5 to 10 year journey to accelerate this. Um, we should be able to bring that to a 50-50 kind of a split in the next 5 years is what our aspiration is, right? Uh, Now, when you look at this whole behavior, one very important driver of this conversion is fundamentally product availability in retail stores, right? If you look at numeric distribution of packaged basmati in India, it still has a very long way to go. So I think that becomes a very important driver. And we're frankly taking up a lot of initiatives to ensure that our product reaches wider in the market. So that's,
Mm.
I think, one very fundamental pillar of growth. The second pillar, which is, I think, plugs in somewhere here, but I think also the role of the new emerging channels like modern trade and e-commerce. I don't call them emerging because I think they're fairly emerged now.
Yeah.
But in that kind of an ecosystem, you already have a consumer who's willing to pay a little bit of a premium for what they're buying. They are wanting to buy hygienic products for the family. Yeah. And there, the fundamental advantage that we have is there is no loose, basmati available on the platform. So I think these channels are playing a strategic role in our journey from driving consumers from loose to packaged. So I think that's the second piece. The third piece, I think, is the fact that today, when consumers buy basmati, and that's a very big problem that we have identified for ourselves, they're fundamentally buying price points. So they're buying a 60 rupees a kilo or a 70 rupees a kilo, 80 rupees kilo basmati, right? Beyond that, there is very limited engagement with this category, right? So I think we have also identified the need to educate and empower consumers in this whole buying journey, right? So to this end, we have already undertaken a 2 year exercise of doing very deep consumer immersions, understanding how consumers buy, and then we are bringing a fresh, rehashed portfolio to the market with new packaging in a couple of months to the market. So I think that is going to play a very important role in this whole piece that we're talking about. And lastly, I think when I talk about the consumer, right, this whole conversion through communication and advertising also has a role to play, right? And if you look at it in this category, uh, we've fundamentally tried to play a couple of things. But I think at the end of the day, in this category, rational behavior doesn't dial up as strongly as emotional behavior. So we look more at emotional drivers in this category than rational drivers, because at the end of the day, it is food, and we feel that in this category, these emotional drivers are going to accelerate this much better than anything else. So I think these few things that we believe are the core engine of driving this fundamental behavior change.
Brilliant. Now the articulation and the clarity in that. I want to touch upon, what you mentioned. I think from what I hear is your major growth drivers today are at the end of the spectrum. There
Yeah,
is the hyper, local stores and dark stores with QCommerce
yeah,
coming and helping you with convenience, and they're happy to pay a higher price. And then at the other end, you've got the loosed folks who will get into packaged through more distribution.
right,
Now, a lot of elements you covered are pretty much understood by many people. Yes, we'll create a communication strategy and advertising strategy and change perceptions and toma, etc. But distribution as a priority for a marketer, it doesn't naturally come to people. They're like, what does one really do as a marketer to solve for distribution?
Yeah.
And I think I've been running IndieFolio for 10 years now, and the more the one more year goes by, the more I realize distribution is everything. It's not really the product actually. So can you explain to maybe a lot of young folks like us, how does a marketer influence distribution strategies?
A marketeer needs to think from a much wider lens than just communication and advertising, right? Fundamentally, at the end of the day, I believe that a marketeer anchors the entire P&L of the organization, right? And until and unless you have a P&L or a profit and loss view of the business, uh, you will work as a disjoint arm of the entire entity, right? Because then as a marketeer, there are 15 things you can do and you will feel excited and you will feel good about it, but how are you impacting the fundamental business metrics is also something that a marketeer needs to keep looking at, right? Secondly, I think this is where the power of influence or the learnings of an individual or a professional marketeer come in terms of how they can use data and objectivity to demonstrate to the business on the potential. For example,
Mhm.
in this case, I may do the best in advertising. I can dial up the most strong consumer insight. But until and unless a product like rice is not made available in the store, all the efforts that we are doing from a communication lens will fall flat, right?
Mm.
If I do not understand that the retailer who is giving the product to the consumer has a role to play in this whole behavior, then it becomes difficult for me to make to get results out of what I'm trying to do, right?
Mm.
And that's where the marketeer needs to come in with a very unbiased point of view in terms of what will work and help the business. So let me also tell you that there are today a lot of data points that marketeers refer to on in their daily operations, like Nielsen, Kantar. A lot of these data can be structured in a very organized manner to be presented to the larger organization, which will showcase the opportunity on the table, right? So I think that becomes very, very important. Also, just to add to Kavan, one point I want to add here, especially and talking about our category, data tells us that there is a significant opportunity now beyond metros in tier 1 and tier 2 towns. Data tells us that there is a lot of growth that we are seeing there. Data tells us that we're under indexed in distribution there. And we also know that when I'm running a TV plan, I'm reaching out to those set of consumers, right? So until and unless I get the product physically available in the store, it is going to be difficult for me to get that conversion that I'm trying to get, right? So I think fundamental data and data orientation brings in a lot of I would say ammunition to the marketing team to convince the larger ecosystem on what needs to be done beyond just running a TV ad or a digital campaign.
Awesome. I want to actually cover one more thing about data. So if I'm not wrong, you must have joined the marketing ecosystem when there was practically no data. I think it was the golden years of creative, as I call it.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
crack one big idea
yeah.
and you're good, and nobody really
True,
knows
true.
if it worked or not. As long as the management is happy and somebody talks about it in a train, great. We've succeeded. But today everything is sliced and diced so much. So um what do you think really has become a priority for the marketer today, right? At one end, you've got like data driven decisions being made, but at the other end, you've also gotten people saying, it's killing creativity. And are you really able to understand emotionally what the marketer is wanting to do? So how do you balance data driven decisions versus serendipitous creativity also, which is
Yeah.
also important?
No, you're very right, and I kind of resonate with a lot of what you're saying. And I think if you talk to more people on the creative agency sides, they will probably highlight this as a very big issue today in the marketing ecosystem. But I think again, as in most cases, a good balance is very important here. As a marketeer or as a leader in marketing, I think people need to understand that the balance is very important, and there are aspects which can be looked at from a very balanced, from a very objective view. But there are certain aspects which will take longer time. And I always believe that most of what you are doing in marketing is for the longer haul. Yeah. Sometimes as marketeers and businesses, we tend to get impatient. Yeah. It's not about impatience. We just need to keep taking learnings and moving on, right? Secondly, I think it's very important to move out of an affirmation bias. An affirmation bias is what most of us tend to get into our day-to-day lives, right? Because we're so involved, and I'm telling you so passionately about the strategy that I have, but I also need to have the capability to challenge my own thoughts on every working day. Otherwise, I will get into that affirmation bias, which will lead me to not challenge my thought process. So I think that's the other point that I want to make. Now, coming back to your larger point, I think creativity is extremely important in terms of building memory structures today. Yeah, creating a brand 20 years back in India was much, I would say, I won't use the term easier, but was relatively less difficult than what it is today, right? There is so much of, I mean, all of us have grown up watching iconic ads, and we still remember a lot of them, right? Surf, Lalita ji. I mean, today, if I were to look at the spectrum of creatives that come out, I don't think that it's possible for a person to kind of have that. So until and unless you really do clutter breaking creative stuff, it's difficult, and it becomes also all the more important in certain categories. So if a category is a low involvement category, then the role of creative brilliance there becomes even more important. Yeah, I talk about rice as a low involvement category. So I know that's yeah. You may when you're buying a phone, it's a high creative involvement, a high involvement category, right? So there you can make that impact, but your creatives, especially in more mundane categories like rice and atta, need to be much more clutter breaking. And if we are not able to do that, that's where we're kind of fundamentally, I think, failing, right? And I keep talking about this, that some of the great brands have been able to do that piece well, which is why they have become great brands, right?
Mm.
And I am a fundamental believer that none of the traditional aspects of marketing, like creative brilliance, need to be get underplayed. I still believe creative brilliance is critical to marketing success. But at the same point of time, I think there is a lot of enablement today that we have in the form of data, uh, which gives us indication of whether we are doing is right or wrong. Now, it depends on how we use it. I think it's important for us to become much more objective, but not become microcritical of data. Because sometimes if you tend to do that, then you lose sight of the larger objective that you're working towards, right?
Right.
And that's very important when we balance the whole data piece and the creative piece. So I think that's what I feel about this.
Put, I believe the right balance is always something people are going to seek
Yeah.
in today's time, and it's going to be a never-ending process. You mentioned you should think of marketing from a long standpoint, and one of the recent trends these days is quick commerce.
Yeah.
I also, was browsing through your LinkedIn feed for the past few days, and you've been pretty vocal about how helpful QCommerce has been
Yeah.
for you. Um, I wanted to get your understanding on where this fits in the overall distribution strategy or the marketing mix for you. If I can just add more pointers here, if you were to ask me, we also work with a lot of brands. Um, I'm not fully sure, what these folks are long term thinking of, which you may be aware of. Like, you've got a lot of places in a distribution channel who also serve for awareness, where, the bandwagon effect of you walking around saying, Acha, chalo, I need to buy this, you kind of get it. And again, by the way, I'm asking you from a perspective beyond KRBL also, because
Sure.
I know
Sure.
that,
Sure.
rice is a very different category. It's more like a need. but just generally speaking about QCommerce, it sometimes just comes as a more effective storefront, where once you've made a decision, okay, I want to actually buy this particular product, is when you open up your Instamarts and Zeptos and order it. And the reason I'm asking this to you is because this is very fundamental for a lot of new companies, right? If it doesn't serve for awareness, is that the right platform to launch at? Do I have to invest in something else if my main checkout point is going to be a Q-commerce? So how are you seeing the long term strategy of quick commerce? With a lot of people today saying that finally we have a threat to the Amazons and Flipkarts, where these guys may overtake them. So there's a lot being said. What's your perspective?
No, this is a space where in the last, I would say 3 to 4 years, we've seen a lot of action, right? And especially post pandemic. You talk to any business, I'm sure they'll tell you that businesses have doubled on quick commerce,
Right.
right? And frankly, I'm just bringing in a dimension of our business. Frankly, when uh, we started our play in quick commerce, we thought it would be a very small part, right? Today, quick commerce contributes to about 60% of rice staples, which is quite counterintuitive if you
Wow.
ask me, right? We thought always thought impulse categories would work better there, but personal care also we hear doing very well there. Yeah. So I think there are certain, I would say, certain hypotheses or that we would have had as in the industry which have gotten challenged, right? In terms of what we are seeing. If you ask me, is the Q-commerce ecosystem very clear of where they're headed? I would say no, because essentially I feel they're also taking it as they go along, and there are a lot of eyes that are opening up at their side also, right, in terms of what's happening. But I think there are some fundamentally good things in this whole piece that's playing out. Uh, at any point of time, I don't see the local Kirana ecosystem in India going out of play, anytime in the near future, right? So it's only adding to consumption, I feel. It's adding to repertoire, I feel, in the family household. It's adding to experimentation. So I think that's a good thing to happen from a consumption standpoint. The second thing I think is that a lot of, for marketeers especially, it's bringing the consumer very close to the organization or the brand. There's a lot, there's no noise, that you're getting when you're getting insights from quick commerce or e-commerce, I would say. Because if you look at traditional marketing, you run an ad, right? You expect the ecosystem to pick up, but from the company to the distributor to the retailer, and when offtake happens, there is a huge ecosystem. In this case, you put it in, you do something, you see immediate results, right? In terms of which part of the funnel you're working on, right? So I think that's the advantage that this channel has and what it can do for you. The second thing, I think to a large extent, it eliminates the retailer influence in terms of the consumer. So the consumer is there on the platform. They're choosing what they want to. Yes, obviously, you're advertising, you're bringing your product up in the whole consumer journey, but that's what you can do. But at the end of the day, it's the consumer's choice. The retailer is doing, or in this case, the quick commerce partner is doing limited things to, push the product onto the consumer, which can happen in a general trade retail ecosystem. The third thing, and you mentioned it in some of the ways brands are seeing it, in a way, for larger brands also, it's driving the brand's imagery and equity, and also influencing to a certain extent, that the footprint on the quick commerce ecosystem is actually impacting how the brand is seen. If you put out high quality images in your content, the brand is seen in a certain manner, right? So those are things that are happening, and even from a marketeer's lens, those are things that we need to see as to, consumers are also evaluating you as a brand, forming certain imagery about you as a brand, even newer brands, right, through quick commerce. And frankly, I see huge potential, and I see this whole modern the e-commerce and the quick commerce ecosystem overtaking modern trade, even for larger brands in the next few years. So very clearly, there is huge potential here for brands to explore. But one thing that brands need to be very clear about when they are looking at quick commerce and e-commerce, I feel there needs to be clarity on which part of the funnel they are working on or what role e-commerce and quick commerce will do for them. And it differs by the brand, the brand's journey, the category they operate in. Sometimes I feel brands get confused whether we should work on the top of the funnel or the bottom of the funnel. Everybody loves to work at the bottom of the funnel because it's easy to justify investments. But clarity there is important in terms of where the brand is going to work on.
Awesome. I wanted to ask you, like, what does this wave of Q-commerce tell you about the Indian consumer today? Because I remember during COVID when Zepto and all, came out, everybody was criticizing it, saying 10 minutes, where is the world going? And then cut to today, I see myself, ordering all the time.
Yeah,
If I'm a little bit hungry, I'm ordering something, and luckily they have like amazing suites of products. I can order healthy things and protein shakes and whatever I want to even ordering head earphones now,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
recently I forgot my earphone, and it's a long meeting, and a long time between two meetings, and I was getting bored at a coffee shop, so I literally ordered an earphone. It came in 8 minutes. Spent $500. Probably won't use the earphone after like a month because I have
yeah,
good ones at home. But I was just like, I was almost feeling guilty, but I was almost also impressed, saying, what's happening. So, like, what do you have to say there? What do you think is happening to the customer, and what are we really prioritizing? Is 10-minute delivery the most important thing?
yeah. No, I think it's frankly moved beyond a 10 minute. Today, if it's a 20 minute, also, I mean, it's not just about that. 10 minutes started it off. Uh, it's like Maggie's 2 minute noodles. Yeah, that's how it's gotten on to people. But I think we do a lot of consumer immersions, right? And a lot of conversation around quick commerce comes up. You know, so in one of those interactions, we got to a very extreme scenario where someone said, I had to take an interview in office, and tea had spilt over my shirt. So he ordered shirt on quick commerce, right? Now, as when people would have launched quick commerce, I'm sure they would not have thought of these use cases, right? But it's happening. The system is evolving. So I feel that and it's going to continue evolving. I feel today, for example, I see stationery as a category, has become huge in quick commerce. What I spoke to someone in the industry, and they told me that's how it's started behaving, which means that a lot of mothers today are seemingly ordering, for stuff for their homework of their kids on quick commerce. Yeah. So what has this has made teachers also much more relaxed. At 8 p.m. in the night, they can give new homework to kids because they think that there is Blinkit and Zepto to come to save them, right? So I think the whole ecosystem, right, from consumer to the quick commerce partner to brands, will keep evolving over the next 3-4 years, and I'm sure we will reach a stage where we'll realize the full potential of this whole thing. Printouts for that exam, printouts on Blinkit, and people talk about that facet that they started using, right? There were data concerns, but when there is the need to get a printout quickly and you don't have a printer at home or you run out of cartridge, people are ordering. And I think at the end of the day, what it is doing fundamentally, and I recall this from a very interesting conversation I was having with a consumer, and said that even my maid today, before I order something on quick commerce, I'm ordering some a drink for people coming home in the evening, I check with my maid, is there anything else that I need to bring, right? So which essentially means that that's how the basket is getting built for quick commerce. So interesting stuff happening, and I think this is going to be an extremely exciting space over the next few years.
Fantastic. No, it's really, really exciting. I think for any marketer, hyper growth distribution channel is always awesome.
Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah.
looking forward to see how that evolves as well. I want to now jump into campaigns. And you've been with the bigwigs in your industry, right? Before KRBL with Dabur ITC. I wanted to uh, talk about building inclusive campaigns. There's been a lot of chatter around for brands like yours who talk to the entire country, but with different preferences, right? And you serve those different preferences. How do you think about campaign creation? I know vernacular is a big priority for many companies. I also see, if I'm not wrong, you folks have done a bunch of things with experiments with Basmati.
Yeah.
So, when you actually end up creating such a pretty large campaign, which needs to be inclusive, which needs to be vernacular, what's your outlook towards creating it? And I'll tell you why I'm asking this to you is because, as a network, which helps brands create these campaigns, we've always seen them struggle because
Hmm.
you may have a head office and a head marketing team in a
Yeah.
certain place who have a certain understanding of how to go about things. And then you also have got maybe one, two agencies who also have a similar thing. But they're all talking to the world, talking to the country, and they are coming up with various ways. Even making a brief and approving content which you don't understand seems to be a big struggle. So I wanted to know, with you having such wide markets and audiences, what's your advice to create an effective vernacular campaign? I'd love for you to unpack. Then if you can give an example with it, nothing like it.
No, I think I've had the, I would say, privilege and knack to work on these kind of campaigns. A lot of categories that I've worked on, right? And it's interesting to understand and realize that a lot of brands, which from the outside you would feel are pan India brands, have very different associations regionally. See, one thing which is very important, I feel, is that for every brand to have a core anchor. Right? If you look at Coke globally, yeah, Coke would have a global anchor, right, to what they want to say. But they also go regional in various markets. So that one, there is the need. I'm reinforcing that for every brand, the need for having a core anchor is very important, right? That core anchor needs to be well understood by people who work on the brand, be it a one-off project that a regional agency is working on, or the agency on record which is working on the brand. So it's important that that's the core that I think everybody needs to understand before they do anything on that, right? Because that's where consistency and continuity matter, right? And it's important also to have those elements of the brand well defined. Yeah. So that's part number one. Part number two, I think there is no going away from the fact that in India, uh, some categories, any category you talk about, there are so many Indias that reside within India. If we were to look at India as one consumer and also at a demographic level, I feel that's not fair. Yeah, it's difficult to have someone in Cochin to be behaving in the same manner with a brand as a consumer in Delhi, and that's a realization that marketeers need to have at an early stage. Thirdly, once you realize it, there is always the tendency for a marketer to create great campaigns, right? We all love it, but it should always come on the back of strong insights. It's not just about capturing certain regional nuances and creating an edit of your national campaign. If that is what you're doing, then I think you're doing only 20% of what you've set out to do. It needs deep consumer immersion, deep understanding before you start that journey. How are the insights in that market of the consumer different from, you know? So I'll talk about a very interesting thing. When I was working on a brand called Dabur Honey, yeah, and when we did a lot of consumer understanding, we realized that the way women look at fitness is very different in the northern part of the country to the southern part of the country. In north, as in most cases, and it's more a generic observation, but I'm just narrowing it down to what I'm saying. It's more about appreciation from people at office that you're looking fit, right? Whereas if you go to south, it's very different. It's from your own core, closer set of people if they appreciate you. So if that changes, then the whole premise of your communication changes. Yes, then you can build in regional nuances of culture and stuff like that, but that comes later. What is more important is the insight. uh, the other important piece is that the brand strategy, if the communication is intended to move the needle on a certain business objective, then that strategy could be different in different markets. Let me a case in point in the current category that we work in, which is Basmati rice. If you look at Basmati, in North, you don't need to tell people how to use Basmati. Basmati is very well penetrated, 70% upward household penetration, right? Um, so it's more about driving people from buying loose to packaged for us. But when you go to South, which is a market where there is already, very limited loose Basmati consumption, and a player like us has 70% plus upwards of market share in that market. So how do we grow? There, if you look at Basmati, and a lot of understanding tells us that Basmati essentially there is used only for biryani. Now, if that continues to happen, then there is limited growth for us in that market. So, how do we grow that market? So, we picked up certain trends through social listening, through consumer understanding, that in more urban pockets, South Indian people have started using Basmati for some stuff like lemon rice, coconut rice, mint rice. So, we said, why not pick this up, and because we're seeing a trend, let's try and drive this behavior. That's where the whole experiments with Basmati idea was born. And we know that it's not a 1 year exercise. These kind of fundamental behavior changes take half a decade to happen. But once you're on the right track, then it is about making it work. And there you bring in regional nuances. That's where so fundamentally, when I look at regional, I think core of the brand is very critical. We need to anchor that. Number two, we need to really work hard on getting core insights. It's not just about doing a lip service, a regional campaign. It's more about really making insights work hard for you, and then crafting that into a great creative, and getting it to work for you.
Incredible. I think it's a really good framework which you just shared. So I think that'll be helpful to
Yeah,
a lot of people. Going from campaigns to creating content and campaigns, right? I think a big focus for marketers is also to create that effective creative production stack, and it's going through a lot of shifts today.
true.
In fact, the entire thesis behind Indiefolio was the changing creative production stacks today.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you, so how does KRBL stack operate? Is it that you've got an AOR on the retainer, or is it that you work on project to project basis with multiple experts over there?
Sure.
Or do you do it in house? Or is it a hybrid of everything?
Sure. So, Kavan, this is a very interesting question, and something which I want to, state at the outset, that it is not something which is static, but it's evolving very rapidly. Let's look at the whole approach. Yes, we do have an agency on record for, be it creative mainline or creative digital or media for that matter. That is fundamentally because a large chunk of spends happen in a consistent manner, and also I feel it's important for a brand to have a brand anchor. Now, again, it would vary with brands of different scale, size, and context. In our case, yes, we do operate this way, where we have agencies on record anchoring, right? But we know we have certain difficult, challenging briefs also. Those briefs which go regional, those briefs in which we know that sitting out of an office in Delhi, we will not have the insights. We also know that the agency sitting out, even the chief creative officer sitting out of Bombay, we may not have, it could stem from certain prior experiences on different categories, but not really fundamental insights, right? And I personally have had experiences in different organizations of having worked with regional agencies. So what I have seen, and let me articulate the pros and the cons of it. The pros are much stronger regional nuances being built into the whole communications piece, and hence better relatability and better resonance with the consumer, right? Where I see the con is the fact that it sometimes tends to dilute the overall anchor of the brand, and those elements don't flow into the creative seamlessly. I think that's where either you need a very strong fundamental in-house team which anchors all of this and is able to hold this together, yeah, or for the agency working on that on a project basis to be able to understand the criticality of that and to anchor that. So I think that's where there is a little bit to be thought about how to do this right. And I think, frankly, there are a lot of large brands who are doing this today, right?
Yeah.
Because because at the end of the day, as I told you, creative is becoming increasingly important. Creative becomes better if you you're closer to your consumer, you are resonating with your consumer better, and that would happen only when you understand the consumer. And this understanding at a ground level comes from a lot of regional agencies, because they understand. If you look at West Bengal as a market, yeah, um, very different culturally, very different nuances, and it would come out better from a regional agency. So if we're able to solve for this, I think it'll be in the benefit of everyone to be able to solve this.
Understood. Understood. One more pointed question I want to throw at you is, I've been hearing from a lot of people that the future the future content stack for a marketer would be in-house, with no AOR, and just getting specialists for projects and campaigns.
Mhm.
um, do you see that to be the future? Because here again, a lot of people agree and disagree. It's 50-50 almost.
Again, I see there's no one answer to this question. I don't see brands of large scale, you know, doing that very soon in the future, because there is a certain expertise that resides, you know, that agencies bring to the table, right? Uh, Having creative capability in house, to me, is something that is not inherent to the DNA of an organization. Yeah. Uh,
Right.
until and unless it's something like a creative expert who kind of is overseeing the whole process. That's all. Yeah. Also, in terms of volume of content, I feel a lot of the volume of content would happen on the digital ecosystem, where you tend to put out more content, not really so very strong, but when you make larger commercials or brand campaigns, that's when you churn out high spend kind of investments in production, right? So I just feel that that's not something that I see happening in the very near future. I only see that there is a you can create a center of excellence in the creative space within the organization, but I don't see that diluting the role of agencies, in terms of delivering output for the organization.
Talking about agencies, a lot of so we're a network of agencies and studios and consultants in Folio, and a lot of founders of these agencies and studios tune into this podcast. So for all of them, in your experience of the last 15 plus years, what separates a great agency from a good agency?
Okay. Uh, Let me talk about my experience of having worked with the so-called biggies of advertising in terms of agency, along with some of the what smaller boutique agencies or founder-based agencies. See, again, there are pros and cons, but when you look at a smaller boutique agency, one, you find a lot more commitment coming in, right? The commitment comes because the founder is also committed to the success of the association, right? The founder tends to bring a lot more value to the table when they get involved in projects. They make an effort to understand the brand, and they push the team. Where I feel it sometimes becomes a constraint is that talent in such organizations is one little bit restricted vis-a-vis the larger network, larger agencies. Also, I feel that sometimes the ideation is anchored by the founder, so the rest of the people are unable to bring their creativity to the table, and that sometimes becomes, I feel, a roadblock, because the founder cannot get involved everywhere, and that's when challenges start coming. So I think if that can be solved for, I think smaller boutique agencies, given the way India is growing, the way brands are getting built in India, I think it's huge potential, right? The larger network ecosystems slow, I would say. Obviously you are a small part of that entire ecosystem, so you tend to get lesser attention. But when you're building large campaigns, then a lot of strategic thought process from professionals who carry a lot of experience comes to the table, so that brings value. So I think it's just fundamentally a horses for courses, and if both work on their cons, I think they can all make a larger impact in the creative ecosystem.
Fantastic. So I think team and speed, I think, are
Yeah,
two
yeah.
two highlights I
Two
hear.
keywords. Yeah.
The toughest keywords to solve for,
True,
but I
true.
think Makes sense, Kunal.
Yeah,
Going to the last part of our question, I think we just hit the 1 hour mark. Um, I wanted to ask you from a creative production standpoint, what do you think the future is going to look like, keeping in mind AI, right? I I I saw you also hiring for someone
yeah, yeah.
who can actually build efficiencies leveraging AI,
Right.
internally, and it's exciting. I'm seeing so many brands ask for that. So, two questions for you. One is, what do you think a marketer should expect AI to do to their job in terms of job in the sense to the content production efficiencies? And the second thing is, if AI is really democratizing everything, do you see that marketing teams would be just two-member teams with no agencies and no creative teams, just two people getting done everything? So if you could just elaborate on those two
Sure,
points.
sure. I think, and this is a question that I've kind of spoken about in a lot of. Anyways, AI is so much in the news that the last two, three panels that I attended had the mention of AI in some way or the other.
Right.
And frankly, everybody is kind of immersing themselves into this whole world, right? I would say there is cautious optimism about it, right?
Mhm.
Uh, but I think, you know, I don't think AI can replace the role of a chief creative officer in an agency or a brand manager, working on a brand. I really honestly don't think so. The human element of anything will always remain despite automation, right? These kinds of things have happened in other functions in businesses on multiple occasions. Yeah. Um, uh, and at the end of the day, the core part of the job would still remain. You can't bring in consumer insights and refine them without the application of human mind, right? It can handle voluminous, it can bring in more efficiency, it can it can help the brand manager, but I don't think at any point of time it is going to be able to replace the current marketing ecosystem. It can make it much more efficient, and we can do much more value added stuff, I feel. So I'm putting human intelligence on a higher pedestal, and I'm saying no, that's not something that I see happening. The other thing, like I said very critically, is the fact that it can't replace the understanding of human emotions and contextualizing anything, right?
Right.
So those are core to doing great marketing, right? And given that, I don't see, you know, uh, what you just mentioned happening, that, it becomes a two-member marketing team. Yes, for example, a lot of stuff that can happen is designing, on aspects of designing, packaging, we can bring in a lot more efficiencies, but at the same point of time, there is going to be the application of human mind to see how right it is to what it is intended to do. So those are my 2 cents on this, what it can do, I feel, though, right? uh, and I think it can bring in elements of personalization at a scalable level,
Hmm.
right? Once you've thought through a campaign, it can bring it in at scale, which otherwise you would not have
Right.
probably thought about, even doing. So I think that's one thing. Also, for decision making today, we look at a lot of data. So a lot of, I would say, predictive analytics, which could, help in decision making,
Right.
is something that I think AI would be able to, kind of bring to the table. And the third thing, which I said, I think in design and content creation, it can be a lot of value add. So I feel these are the three things where AI is going to make a difference in the next few years. And but certainly, I don't see AI replacing the role of anyone in the marketing ecosystem at this point of time.
When you say, there'll be more efficiency in content production, you can basically get more done for less
Yeah,
investments.
yeah.
Um, what do you see would then become a mandate for a marketer? Will it be to produce more content, or do you think they'll focusing on reducing the spends? Because I mean, marketers will have to really decide, if I'm making 500 creatives for 100 rupees, will I now make 10,000 creatives for 500 rupees, or will it be that I'm going to stick to the same budget but with a different tat? So do you have any clue? I think my question really comes to, what really works from a distribution standpoint, right?
Hmm.
More creatives, more personalization, more segmentation help with the CTRs? Or is the ROI driven marketing, where you're decreasing cost of production and increasing more cost of promotion,
Hmm.
the real strategy there?
No, I think what you just mentioned as the initial part of what you said, I think that's what's going to happen more. I feel
Interesting.
it's more about, like I said, it's not about driving efficiencies through reducing costs in production. It's more about making your content more relevant, more personalized, and that's where AI is going to come in, right? Because we all know today that engagement levels are driven through relevant communication, right? Personalization brings in that degree of relevance to communication, and I think that's where AI can have a very important role to play, and that's what's going to play out, I feel, in the next few years. Marketers are going to experiment more with this, and I think as more and more case studies of success get built up, I think the overall cautious optimism will turn into positive optimism very soon.
Incredible, incredible. Um, Honestly, music to my ears. So this was like a personal question to use to be like, hey, am I in the right domain?
No, but
Coming to
just one word of thought here. I think there needs to be much more education to marketers also of the capabilities of AI. Right.
right,
What today people are doing are more, picking up stuff, listening to people. This is the capability. This is happening. I think for this to really, perform to its potential, I feel education is one key part for the overall marketing ecosystem to really, utilize the full potential of AI that we have seen.
absolutely agree. Absolutely, I feel marketers are the ones who will decide the goalpost of sorts for a lot of people to follow through,
Right.
keeping in mind AI in content and AI in marketing.
Right.
So I think couldn't agree more. Jumping to the last question, Kunal, we are here finally. We spoke about a very consistent few things, which is know your customer and do that by understanding data. And you've mentioned some heavy names like Nielsen's, etc. Now, I wanted to give advice to a young company, right? Somebody who's, let's say, doing 0 to 1 in CPG or FMCG, where I don't have a team, I don't have a big budget. I can't really afford, the various things you may be doing at scale to understand consumer insights. Ki north mein ye hota hai, south mein ye hota hai. And let's say I'm doing 0 to 1. I'm trying to understand my customer, their price point, based on that, their preferences, their customer journey. Could you help them understand if they're doing 0 to 1 and they're building their marketing function or their go-to market? How do they really understand the consumer insight?
I don't have a single answer to this, but I just feel that one, the fact understanding the consumer is extremely important. So that's the starting point. Once you have that starting point, I think there are various ways to get there. The best way to would be to subscribe to a Nielsen Kantar data and try and extract juice out of it. A lot of other ways of talking to people in the industry, trying to understand the customer by maybe having one-on-one conversations with them, right? Triangulation of other sources of secondary data which today are available in the industry for you know a lower cost, right? uh, I feel is possible because I've personally done that on projects where I've had lesser budgets, right? Where I have been able to pick up trends from other data points, and I think that's the essence of a marketeer. That you just go and stand at a store and you pick up insights, right? You could do that same thing by doing a structured research through Nielsen, which would cost you, maybe 100x more than the cost you did finally to get five students to sit and stand at the store and make certain observations. So I think the whole thriving mindset to be able to, get all of this together and triangulate is something that when you have lesser budgets on a particular aspect need to be looked at.
Incredible. I think that's golden advice. I feel a lot of people are stuck in their homes and offices and just not getting out
Yeah.
to understand the
Yeah.
customer. It reminds me of a story I think saw in a podcast about the founder of Fog, who was just standing outside, shops and seeing perfume versus deodorant, and the how people react to that.
Yeah.
And that's how they actually overtook a lot of top players out there. So sometimes small things are the ones which make a
Yeah,
big
yeah. So in
difference.
fact, one quick anecdote I want to share. It was my initial days in my career when I was with ITC, and I think it was in Nagpur, and the food CEO had come down to the market, to work the market with me. And I thought he would spend most of his time going from outlet to outlet, seeing our availability of product and how he stood at one store for about an hour, and he asked questions to the retailer about all categories in which we were not in, right? And we
Wow.
didn't get into those categories in ITC, but it was more to understand, you know. So to answer your question, there are ways to get information which are way beyond doing very structured researches, right? So I just feel that's the core DNA of a marketer, to be able to pick up all of these things and then translate them into effective action.
Fantastic. Kunal, thank you so much. This brings us to the end of the podcast. I hope you had a good time.
Yes, it was great interacting with you. In fact, it brought back a lot of memories of my journey over the last 15, 16 years. So thanks for this. It was absolutely wonderful talking to you.
I'm glad. Thank you so much. And for everybody who's stuck along so far, if you'd like another leader like Kunal joining us, do like, share, and subscribe. You'll get notified when the next episode comes out soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kavan.